There's one gesture that every human being makes without realizing it, a movement so automatic and deeply rooted that even the most sophisticated pretense cannot completely mask it. Have you ever found yourself watching someone speak and feeling that something didn't add up, even though their words seemed perfect? Picture yourself at dinner with a friend who's telling you how happy they are in their relationship. The words are right, the smile is in the right place, yet there's something about the way they keep touching their neck, the way they avoid your gaze for just a millisecond too long, that whispers a different truth. Sigmund Freud was right when he claimed that the unconscious always finds a way to express itself, even when the conscious mind desperately tries to hide it. What you'll discover today will forever change how you read the people around you, and most importantly, yourself. If you want to keep exploring the deepest secrets of human behavior, subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to discover is just the beginning of a journey into the human soul. The first signal we'll analyze is so universal that you'll recognize it immediately. Hands are the most faithful traitors of the human soul. While the mouth lies and eyes learn to fake, hands continue telling the truth with a brutal honesty that even we ourselves cannot completely control. Imagine you're at a job interview. The candidate in front of you answers every question confidently. Their tone is firm, their gaze direct. Yet while they speak about their skills, their hands move almost imperceptibly toward their face, briefly touch their nose, clench into fists for an instant, then open again. What you're observing isn't common nervousness. It's the unconscious desperately trying to contain a deeper anxiety. According to Freud, these gestures represent what we would call failed acts of the body. When the conscious ego tries to maintain control of the situation, the id, that primitive and instinctual part of our psyche, still finds a way to manifest itself through involuntary hand movements. It's as if our hands were in direct connection with that part of us that cannot lie. Think about when someone tells you a lie. Often, without realizing it, they bring their hand to their mouth, as if wanting to physically hold back the false words. Or they touch their neck, in what Freud would identify as a gesture of self-comfort, an unconscious attempt to calm the anxiety generated by the dissonance between what's being said and what's actually felt. Hands that clench into fists during an apparently calm conversation reveal repressed anger. Fingers that nervously play with an object betray a need for control that the situation doesn't allow them to satisfy. Every movement is a language, every gesture an involuntary confession. But there's an even more fascinating aspect. These movements aren't random. They follow patterns that reflect our personal history, our unprocessed traumas, our most hidden desires. A person who has suffered psychological violence will tend to instinctively bring their hands into protective positions when they feel emotionally threatened, even if the threat exists only in their perception. Freud called this phenomenon compulsion to repeat. Our unconscious drives us to recreate, through gestures and behaviors, situations and dynamics from the past. Our hands thus become the instruments through which we continuously relive our emotional history, often without being aware of it. The most extraordinary thing is that once you learn to recognize these signals, you can never stop seeing them. You'll start noticing how people around you constantly reveal their deepest emotional states through movements they believe they control perfectly. Have you ever observed your hands while talking about something that makes you uncomfortable? Have you ever noticed how they behave when you tell something you're not completely convinced about? But hands are just the beginning. In the next chapter, we'll discover how eyes, what we call the mirror of the soul, can lie much more than we believe. Eyes are the mirror of the soul is perhaps one of the most widespread lies of popular culture. In reality, eyes are masters of deception, capable of such sophisticated pretense that they often manage to fool even ourselves. But Freud taught us something revolutionary. It's not what eyes show that betrays them, it's what they desperately try to hide. Imagine being at a party and observing a couple arguing animatedly in a corner. She looks him straight in the eyes while telling him how much she loves him. But there's something mechanical in that gaze, something too intense, too forced. He returns the gaze, but for a fraction of a second, his eyes seem to search for an escape route in the room. What you're observing isn't love, it's what Freud called reaction formation, a defense mechanism that transforms a feeling into its opposite. The point isn't that eyes lie consciously. The point is that they become accomplices to a deeper lie, the one we tell ourselves to survive emotionally. When someone stares into your eyes with too much intensity while speaking to you, they're often overcompensating for a difficulty in truly sustaining that contact. It's as if the unconscious was saying, if I look hard enough, maybe I'll manage to convince even myself of what I'm saying. Freud identified in involuntary eye movements true neurotic symptoms. The blinking that accelerates when touching a sensitive topic, the gaze that shifts imperceptibly upward when trying to access painful memories, the pupil that dilates not from excitement but from anxiety. Every movement is a signal coming directly from the unconscious. But there's an even more subtle and revealing phenomenon, what Freud called psychic scotoma, selective blindness. Observe someone while they tell about a traumatic event from the past. Their eyes seem to look through you, as if they saw something you cannot see. In reality, they're avoiding seeing something that's too painful to face. The unconscious has created an emotional blind spot, and the eyes literally reflect it. This mechanism is particularly evident in relationships. A person who fears abandonment will develop an almost supernatural ability to read in their partner's eyes every possible signal of disinterest or betrayal, but will be completely blind to signals of love and dedication. Their eyes will obsessively search for confirmations of their fears, systematically ignoring everything that could contradict them. The most fascinating aspect is that eyes also betray the type of psychological defense we're using. Those who use denial will have a strangely empty gaze when facing topics that should arouse intense emotions. Those who project their own conflicts onto others will have a gaze that always seems to seek external confirmations of their own intuitions. The truth is that our eyes don't reflect who we are, but who we're desperately trying not to be. Every gaze is an escape, every blink a resistance. Have you ever noticed how your gaze changes when you talk about people who have hurt you? In the next chapter, we'll discover how our posture tells stories that even we don't know. The human body is a living archive, a museum of our emotional history, where every trauma, every repressed joy, every denied desire crystallizes into postures, movements, and tensions that we carry with us for our entire lives. Freud was the first to understand that the body never forgets, even when the mind chooses to remove. Imagine walking down the street and observing a woman advancing with shoulders slightly curved forward, as if carrying an invisible weight. Her pace is quick but uncertain, her head slightly tilted to one side. You don't know her, but something in her way of moving tells you about a story of submission, of a childhood where she learned to make herself small to survive. What you're observing isn't simply bad posture, it's what Freud called somatic conversion, the transformation of psychic conflicts into physical symptoms. Our body preserves the memory of every significant emotional experience through what psychoanalysts call character armor. Every time as children we had to repress anger, our muscles contracted in a specific configuration. Every time we had to hide fear, our diaphragm locked in a defensive position. Every time we had to give up a desire, a part of our body stiffened to contain that pain. Think of someone who lived years in a violent family environment. Even decades later, their body will maintain constant tension in the shoulder and neck area, as if always ready to defend against an imminent attack. Their arms will tend to stay close to the body, in a posture that Freud would connect to the need to protect vital organs from aggressions that now exist only in cellular memory. But there's an even more extraordinary aspect. The body doesn't just preserve traumas, it preserves repressed desires too. A person who has given up their own sensuality will often develop rigidity in the pelvic area that reflects the repression of libidinal drives. Someone who learned not to express their opinions will often have throat problems or a particularly weak voice, as if the body had literally swallowed the unspoken words. Freud called this phenomenon the return of the repressed in the body. What the mind drives from consciousness doesn't disappear, it transfers to the body, where it continues to live in the form of symptoms, tensions, compulsive movements. A person who continuously moves their legs while sitting might be expressing a need to escape that they cannot afford to recognize consciously. The most impressive thing is that these bodily patterns are unconsciously transmitted from one generation to another. A child will learn to walk like their father, not only through imitation, but because they will absorb the same emotional tensions that shape the paternal posture. Observe the people around you with this new awareness. Notice how those who fear conflict tend to shrink their physical space, how those who need control always keep their muscles tense. The body tells stories that the mind has forgotten, but that the unconscious jealously guards. Have you ever noticed which parts of your body stiffen when you're under stress? In the next chapter, we'll discover how even our words betray the unconscious. I said what I thought, not what I meant to say. This apparently innocent phrase hides one of Freud's most revolutionary discoveries. The words "you get wrong" often reveal truths that your conscious mind isn't ready to admit. Slips aren't random errors, they're involuntary confessions of the unconscious. Imagine being at a corporate dinner and hearing your boss say, "I'm very happy to fire this project," instead of "launch this project." Everyone laughs. He corrects himself embarrassedly. But you've just witnessed something extraordinary, the unconscious finding a way to express its true opinion about that project. Freud called these moments the triumph of the unconscious over censorship, instance when our psychological defenses lower enough to allow truth to emerge. The mechanism is more complex than it seems. When we speak, our conscious mind chooses words it deems appropriate, safe, socially acceptable. But the unconscious works in parallel, pressing to bring up repressed contents, denied desires, uncomfortable truths. The slip is the result of this battle, a moment when the unconscious wins and the wrong word escapes the control of censorship. But it's not just blatant slips that betray us. Freud had identified much more subtle patterns. People who have unresolved problems with authority will tend to unconsciously use passive-aggressive language even when they believe they're being collaborative. Those who fear abandonment will fill their sentences with references to permanence and security, even in contexts where these themes have nothing to do with anything. Observe how a person describes their relationships. Someone who says, "We're very close," instead of "we love each other very much," might be revealing a need for fusion that stems from a deep fear of loneliness. Those who continuously use expressions like maybe, probably, I'm not sure, even when talking about objective facts, are probably expressing a basic insecurity that goes well beyond the specific content of the conversation. Then there's what Freud called symptomatic choice of words. A person who has suffered abuse will often describe positive situations by involuntarily using a lexicon that recalls violence. "I was conquered by this book. That movie hit me. That music devastated me." And it's as if the unconscious couldn't conceive emotional intensity without reconnecting it to the original trauma. Excessive denials are another precious signal. When someone says, "I'm not jealous at all," with too much emphasis, they're probably fighting against a jealousy they can't admit. Freud maintained that we often affirm the opposite of what we feel precisely to defend ourselves from the truth of those feelings. But there's an even deeper level, the words we never say. Some people will systematically avoid certain words or expressions that recall areas of their psyche too painful to explore. Those who have problems with their own sexuality can talk for hours without ever using terms that have even remotely to do with the body or desire. Language thus becomes a map of the unconscious, where every lexical choice, every avoidance, Every compulsive repetition tells us about inner conflicts. Have you ever noticed which words you use most often when you're agitated? In the next chapter, we'll explore how our automatic reactions follow precise patterns. There exists a magical moment, a fraction of a second between the stimulus and our conscious reaction, where the unconscious reveals itself completely naked. Before the rational mind intervenes to filter, justify, mask, there's an instant of pure emotional truth that Freud considered the most direct window into our deep psyche. Imagine observing someone receiving unexpected news. In the first milliseconds, their face goes through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, fear, anger, maybe relief. Only later comes the appropriate expression, the one they decided to show. But in that first fraction of a second, you saw their authentic emotional truth, the one that even they don't know they're feeling. These automatic reactions aren't random. They're the result of what Freud called emotional complexes, nuclei of memories, emotions, and associations that formed during our most significant experiences and now function as automatic programs. When present reality touches one of these complexes, the reaction is immediate and revealing. Think of someone who has experienced an important betrayal. Every time they find themselves in a situation where they perceive even vaguely the possibility of being deceived, their eyes will harden for an instant, their shoulders will stiffen, their voice will take on a slightly colder tone. All this before their conscious mind has even processed the situation. It's the unconscious recognizing a familiar danger and automatically activating defenses. Freud had discovered something extraordinary. These automatisms always follow the same pattern as the original situation that generated them. A person who, as a child, learned that expressing their opinion led to punishment, as an adult, will have an automatic contraction reaction every time they find themselves in a situation where they might be called to say what they think. Their body will instinctively prepare for punishment, even if they rationally know there's no danger. But there's an even more fascinating aspect. These automatisms don't just recreate the past, they actively seek to complete it. It's what Freud called compulsion to repeat. A person who had an emotionally absent father will unconsciously tend to choose partners who reproduce that dynamic, and their automatic reactions will be calibrated to maintain that familiar distance, even if they consciously desire intimacy. Observe people's automatic reactions when they're contradicted, when they receive a compliment, when someone gets too close physically or emotionally. Every reaction tells a story. Those who stiffen at physical contact carry in their body the memory of invasions or violations. Those who automatically smile when criticized probably learned that kindness is the only safe survival strategy. The most impressive thing is that these automatisms are activated even in completely innocent situations that only vaguely recall the original trauma or conflict. It's as if the unconscious were always alert, ready to recognize danger patterns that often exist only in emotional memory. These mechanisms become particularly evident in intimate relationships, where emotional closeness tends to activate our deepest complexes. Have you ever noticed your automatic reactions when someone criticizes you? In the last chapter, we'll discover how all these signals combine to create the most revealing of human behaviors. The most bewildering and revealing human behavior that Freud ever identified isn't the pursuit of pleasure, but its systematic escape. There exists in each of us a mysterious force that precisely when we're about to reach what we desire most, pushes us to destroy it. It's not masochism, it's not bad luck, it's what Freud called death drive. The unconscious need to return to a state of non-tension that often manifests as self-destruction. Imagine knowing someone who has always desired a stable and loving relationship. Finally, they meet the right person. Everything goes wonderfully. Plans become concrete. And precisely at that moment, they start behaving in inexplicably destructive ways. They become jealous without reason. They seek fights over insignificant issues. They emotionally distance themselves precisely when the other gets closer. What you're observing isn't a change of feelings, it's the unconscious sabotaging happiness because it perceives it as a threat. Freud had discovered that many people are more afraid of happiness than unhappiness. Unhappiness is familiar, predictable, controllable. Happiness is unknown, vulnerable, requires abandoning defenses we built to survive. For the unconscious, it's often safer to actively destroy happiness rather than risk losing it passively. This mechanism manifests in subtle and devastating ways. Those who have grown an image of themselves based on failure will unconsciously find ways to confirm that narrative, even when reality contradicts it. Those who have identified with the victim role will feel lost if things go too well, and will unconsciously create situations that re-establish the familiar dynamic of suffering. But there's an even deeper aspect, what Freud called unconscious guilt. Many people carry within themselves the irrational conviction that they don't deserve happiness, often due to childhood events for which they felt responsible. A depressed mother, a father who leaves, a brother who dies in the child's mind, everything becomes their fault, and that guilt becomes an unconscious program that will continue sabotaging every attempt at fulfillment for their entire life. Sabotage takes creative and cruel forms. There are those who mysteriously get sick every time they're about to reach an important goal. Those who always find an excuse not to show up to appointments that could change their lives. Those who start drinking or cheating precisely when the relationship becomes serious. Those who abandon promising projects one step from completion. Freud noticed that people often sabotage exactly what they desire most, precisely because they desire it so intensely that they're terrified at the idea of losing it. It's easier to destroy it immediately rather than live in constant anxiety that someone else might take it away. The mechanism is particularly evident in professional success. Those who have internalized the idea of not being worth enough will find subtle ways to prove they were right. They'll arrive late to important meetings, say the wrong thing at the wrong moment, forget crucial deadlines. The most tragic part is that these self-destructive behaviors are often rationalized as virtues. I'm too honest. I don't know how to compromise. Do you recognize these patterns in your life? Have you ever noticed how certain decisions take you away from what you want most? Freud was right. The unconscious always finds a way to speak, even when the conscious mind desperately tries to silence it. Every gesture, every glance, every word is a clue, every automatic reaction an involuntary confession. Now that you have this awareness, what will you do? Will you continue living unaware of these mechanisms, or will you start using them to better understand yourself and the people around you? Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to know where these Freudian reflections have reached. If this video made you see something new in yourself or others, hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dives into the human psyche. Share this video with someone who might need these insights. Thanks for having the courage to look into the shadow. Only those willing to see the truth can truly begin to change it.